The morning mist hung heavy over the grounds of Royal Lodge as Prince stood before his bedroom window, adjusting his tie for what felt like the 100th time. The silk fabric trembled slightly between his fingers, betraying the nerves he desperately tried to conceal. Today marked a significant milestone in his tumultuous journey back into public life. His first appearance at a family gathering since the devastating loss of his royal titles and military honors. The christening of his grandchild, Princess' second son, had been planned months in advance. What should have been a joyous family celebration now carried the weight of intense scrutiny and whispered conversations. Understood that every move he made would be analyzed, every expression photographed, and every interaction dissected by the media and public alike. Sarah, his ex-wife who had remained steadfastly supportive throughout his darkest hours, knocked gently on his door. "Darling, it's time," she said softly, her voice carrying both encouragement and understanding. She had witnessed his transformation over the past months, from a man who once commanded respect as a decorated naval officer to someone who now questioned his place within his own family. As they walked through the corridors of their shared residence, his mind wandered to simpler times. He remembered the of his own daughters, Beatrice, and when he stood proudly in his naval uniform, surrounded by family and friends who looked upon him with admiration. Those days felt like a lifetime ago, buried beneath layers of legal battles, public humiliation, and the gradual erosion of his status within the monarchy. The car journey to the church was filled with an uncomfortable silence. Gazed out at the familiar English countryside, watching as ordinary families went about their Sunday routines, children playing in gardens, couples walking their dogs, elderly people tending to their roses. Their anonymity, their ability to exist without constant judgment or the weight of institutional expectations. Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Remember, this is about family," she reminded him gently. "Wants you there. Your grandsons need their grandfather present for this special day." Her words provided some comfort, but couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a lion's den, unprepared for the reactions he might encounter. The church came into view, its ancient stone walls standing as a testament to centuries of royal ceremonies and family traditions. George's chapel at Windsor had witnessed countless moments of joy and sorrow within the royal family, and today it would add another chapter to its storied history. Notice the discreet security presence and the small gathering of photographers positioned at a respectful distance, their telephoto lenses ready to capture his every movement. Princess had specifically requested that the christening remain a private family affair, but the presence of media was inevitable given the circumstances. Appreciated his daughter's efforts to protect him while still including him in this momentous occasion. Her loyalty and love had been unwavering throughout his trials, even when it meant facing criticism herself. As they approached the chapel entrance, caught sight of other family members beginning to arrive. His brother Charles, now king, stepped out of his official vehicle by his side. The king's expression was carefully neutral, but detected the subtle tension in his posture. The burden of balancing family loyalty with institutional responsibility was evident in every measured step. Princess Anne arrived shortly after, her practical demeanor unchanged despite the circumstances. She offered a brief nod of acknowledgement, her relationship with him having always been more straightforward and less complicated by the political implications that seemed to surround everything else in their lives. The weight of his decisions over the past few years pressed heavily on his shoulders as he realized this moment represented more than just a family gathering. It was a test of whether he could find a way to exist within the royal framework after losing his official role, whether forgiveness and redemption were possible, and whether the bonds of family could overcome the strain of public scandal. Taking a deep breath, straightened his shoulders and prepared to face whatever awaited him inside the sacred walls of the chapel. This was his first step back into a world that had once embraced him as a war hero and working royal, but now viewed him through a lens of suspicion and disappointment. The christening of his grandson would either mark the beginning of his gradual rehabilitation or serve as a painful reminder of all that he had lost. The heavy wooden doors of the chapel stood before him like a threshold between his isolated existence and the possibility of reconnection with his family and heritage. With Sarah's supportive presence beside him and the knowledge that his daughters wanted him there, summoned the courage to cross that threshold and face whatever judgment awaited him on the other side. The interior of George's chapel enveloped in familiar shadows and golden light filtering through centuries-old stained glass windows. The sacred space had been witness to his own wedding to Sarah in 1986, when the world watched with celebration and hope for their future together. Now, decades later, he entered the same hallowed halls under vastly different circumstances, his footsteps echoing softly against the ancient stone floors. Princess approached her father with her infant son cradled in her arms, the baby wrapped in the same christening gown that had been used for royal baptisms for generations. Her smile was genuine and warm, untainted by the controversies that had dominated headlines about her family. "Papa," she whispered, reaching up to kiss his cheek, "thank you for being here. This means everything to me." The simple gesture nearly broke carefully constructed composure. In that moment, surrounded by the weight of tradition and family love, he felt a flicker of the man he used to be, the devoted father who had always prioritized his daughter's happiness above all else. Princess Beatrice joined them, her own young daughter in tow, creating a multi-generational tableau that reminded why he had chosen to endure the scrutiny of public appearance. Other family members filled the chapel gradually, each arrival carrying its own significance. The Earl and Countess of Wessex, Edward and Sophie, offered polite but somewhat distant greetings, sensed their discomfort, understanding that his presence complicated their own positions within the royal hierarchy. They had always maintained their dignity through careful navigation of royal protocols, and his scandal had disrupted that carefully maintained balance. King Charles approached his younger brother with measured steps, his expression revealing the internal struggle between familial affection and institutional responsibility. The brief embrace they shared was captured by the subtle click of cameras, though both men were acutely aware that their relationship had been fundamentally altered by recent events. Charles said quietly, his voice carrying both warmth and caution, "I'm glad you could be here for." The Archbishop of Canterbury began the ceremony with traditional prayers and blessings, his voice filling the chapel with words of hope and spiritual renewal. Found himself focusing intently on the religious aspects of the service, seeking solace in the familiar rhythms of Anglican worship that had provided comfort throughout his life. The ritual of baptism, with its themes of cleansing and new beginnings, resonated deeply with his current circumstances. As the ceremony progressed, noticed the careful choreography of family interactions around him. Conversations were stilted but polite, with relatives making genuine efforts to maintain normalcy despite the underlying tension. His nephew Prince William arrived with and their children, offering cordial but reserved greetings that reflected the complex dynamics within the younger generation of royals. The baby's cries during the actual baptism broke some of the tension in the room, eliciting gentle laughter and knowing smiles from the gathered family members. In that moment of shared humanity, felt temporarily freed from the burden of being a controversial figure and simply existed as a grandfather witnessing a sacred milestone in his family's life. Princess had chosen her father to be one of the witnesses for the baptism, a decision that demonstrated her unwavering support despite the potential for criticism. As signed the official documents, his hand trembled slightly, not from nerves this time, but from the overwhelming emotion of being included in such a significant moment. The simple act of putting pen to paper felt like a reclamation of his place within the family structure. Sarah watched proudly from across the chapel, her eyes never leaving his face as he participated in the ceremony. Their unusual post-divorce relationship had proven to be one of the most stable aspects of his life during recent turmoil. Her presence served as a reminder that forgiveness and continued love were possible even after profound disappointments and public failures. The reception following the ceremony took place in a private room within Windsor Castle, away from the prying eyes of media and public observers. Here, in the more relaxed atmosphere of family celebration, began to feel glimpses of acceptance from relatives who had maintained distance in recent months. Conversations gradually became more natural, though he remained acutely aware of the careful boundaries that now defined his interactions with other working members of the royal family. Young children ran between adults, their innocent energy providing a welcome distraction from the heavier undercurrents of adult conversation. Gravitated toward him naturally, unaware of the complexities that surrounded their grandfather's current status. Their unconditional affection reminded him of what truly mattered beyond titles, honors, and public perception. As the afternoon progressed, found himself engaged in meaningful conversations with family members who had maintained their distance during the worst periods of his legal troubles. While discussions remained carefully neutral regarding his future role within the monarchy, The very fact that such conversations were taking place felt like progress towards some form of reconciliation. The day represented a delicate balance between need for family connection and the royal institution's requirement to maintain appropriate distance from controversial figures. Every interaction was carefully calibrated to demonstrate family unity, while avoiding any suggestion that his status within the monarchy had changed or might be restored. The afternoon reception continued within the historic walls of Windsor Castle, where found himself navigating conversations that felt like diplomatic negotiations. Each exchange carried multiple layers of meaning, with family members carefully balancing personal affection against institutional concerns. He observed how naturally his relatives had adapted to treating him as a private family member rather than a working royal, an adjustment that highlighted just how dramatically his circumstances had changed. Jack, Princess' husband, made particular efforts to ensure felt included in discussions about the children's future and family plans. The gesture wasn't lost on, who recognized the young man's kindness and understood how difficult it must be for his daughter's husband to navigate these complex family dynamics. Jack's acceptance offered hope that the next generation of the family might judge him less harshly than the institution itself. During quieter moments, retreated to observe rather than participate, watching his family members interact with the ease and confidence that came with their secure positions within the monarchy. He remembered when he possessed that same assurance, when his naval service and royal duties provided clear purpose and unquestioned identity. The loss of that certainty had left him struggling to define himself beyond the controversy that had consumed his public image. Princess Anne approached him during one such reflective moment, her characteristic directness cutting through the polite facades that had characterized most of his interactions that day. "You look better," she said simply, studying his face with the clinical assessment she applied to most situations. "The isolation hasn't been good for you, but you seem to be finding your footing again." Her honesty was both refreshing and challenging. Appreciated his sister's refusal to treat him with the careful politeness that others had adopted, but her words also forced him to confront how much the past months had changed him. The man who once commanded ships and represented the crown at state functions had been replaced by someone still searching for his place in a world that had fundamentally shifted around him. The conversation with Anne revealed the complexity of family relationships under such extraordinary circumstances. While she maintained her loyalty to the institution and understood the necessity of his reduced role, she also recognized him as her brother who deserved compassion and the possibility of redemption. This balance between institutional loyalty and family love characterized many of the interactions experienced throughout the day. As evening approached, the gathering began to wind down, with family members preparing to return to their respective homes and responsibilities. Realized that this had been his longest sustained contact with his extended family since the height of his controversies, and the experience had been both exhausting and healing. The careful choreography of the day had allowed for connection while respecting the boundaries that his situation required. Princess made a point of spending the final hour of the reception focused on her father, showing him photographs from recent family events he had missed and sharing stories about her children's development. These intimate moments reminded of what he was fighting to preserve, not his titles or public role, but his place within the family structure that had always been his source of strength and identity. The drive back to Royal Lodge was markedly different from the tense journey that morning. Felt a sense of cautious optimism, not about any potential restoration of his former status, but about the possibility of maintaining meaningful relationships with family members despite his changed circumstances. The day had proven that love and loyalty could survive even the most challenging situations, though they might take different forms than before. Sarah, who had remained a steady presence throughout the day, finally broke the silence in the car. "You did beautifully today," she said, her voice filled with pride and relief. "Was so happy to have you there, and you handled every moment with dignity." Her validation meant more to than any public approval could have, representing as it did the opinion of someone who knew him completely and had chosen to stand by him despite everything. Back at Royal Lodge, reflected on the significance of the day's events. The christening had served multiple purposes beyond the religious ceremony itself. It had been a test of his ability to function within family gatherings, an opportunity for relatives to assess his current state of mind, and a chance for him to demonstrate that he could participate in royal family life without creating additional controversy or embarrassment. The media coverage of the event would undoubtedly focus on every detail of his appearance and behavior, but found himself less concerned with public perception than he had been in months. The genuine warmth he had experienced from his daughters and provided a foundation of support that external criticism couldn't undermine. For the first time since his world had collapsed around him, he felt connected to something larger than his own troubles. The evening news broadcasts would feature brief glimpses of the day's events, carefully edited to show appropriate royal family unity while avoiding any suggestion that status had changed. The delicate balance between acknowledging his presence and maintaining institutional distance would be preserved through careful media management, allowing the family to celebrate privately while protecting the monarchy's reputation. As he prepared for bed that night, understood that the christening represented neither complete rehabilitation nor continued exile, but rather a new phase of his relationship with both his family and the institution he had served for decades. The path forward remained uncertain, but the day had demonstrated that connection and love could survive even the most challenging circumstances. The weeks following the christening brought unexpected changes to his carefully structured routine of isolation and reflection. The successful navigation of his first public family appearance had opened doors he thought might remain permanently closed, though he approached these new opportunities with hard-earned caution and humility. The phone calls from family members increased gradually, no longer limited to his daughters, but extending to cousins and relatives who had maintained distance during the worst of his troubles. Sarah noted the subtle but significant shift in his demeanor during their daily conversations over breakfast at Royal Lodge. The haunted expression that had characterized his features for months had softened, replaced by glimpses of the confident man she had fallen in love with decades earlier. While the road to any form of rehabilitation remained long and uncertain, the christening had provided proof that he could function within the royal family structure without creating additional controversy. Princess called her father regularly to share updates about her children and to gauge his interest in attending smaller, private family gatherings. These conversations revealed her strategic thinking about gradually reintegrating him into family life while respecting the boundaries that his circumstances required. She understood intuitively that her father's path back to acceptance would need to be carefully managed and paced to avoid overwhelming either him or other family members. The palace's approach to his reemergence was studied and deliberate. No official statements were made about his participation in the christening, but the careful management of media coverage suggested a willingness to allow for his quiet presence at private family events without any suggestion of restored public duties. This middle ground represented the institution's attempt to balance family unity with the need to maintain appropriate distance from controversial figures. Began receiving invitations to small dinners and casual gatherings at the homes of various family members, each carefully planned to avoid media attention while allowing for natural family interaction. These occasions provided opportunities for relatives to observe his current state of mind and assess his ability to participate in royal family life without creating additional difficulties for the monarchy. The conversations at these gatherings revealed how much perspective had changed during his months of isolation and reflection. He listened more than he spoke, asked thoughtful questions about others' lives and work, and demonstrated a humility that had not always characterized his previous interactions with family members. The experience of losing everything had taught him valuable lessons about the importance of relationships over status or recognition. King Charles privately expressed cautious optimism about his brother's apparent growth and maturity, though he remained committed to maintaining clear boundaries regarding any potential return to public duties. The king understood that forgiveness within the family was separate from institutional rehabilitation, and he worked to ensure that understood these distinctions clearly to avoid unrealistic expectations about his future role. Princess Beatrice also began including her father in more family activities, particularly those involving her young daughter who had formed a strong attachment to her grandfather. These multi-generational interactions reminded of his value as a family member beyond any official royal role, providing him with purpose and motivation to continue his careful journey toward acceptance and redemption. The gradual reintegration process was not without challenges and setbacks. Some family members remained uncomfortable with his presence at certain events, leading to careful negotiations about guest lists and the timing of gatherings. These conversations required delicate diplomacy and frequent adjustments to accommodate various comfort levels and concerns about potential media scrutiny. His relationship with his nephews, Prince William and Prince Harry, remained particularly complex, reflecting the younger generation's different perspective on duty, accountability, and the monarchy's future. While both had maintained basic courtesy during family interactions, their comfort level with his presence varied significantly depending on the circumstances and the potential for public attention. The media continued to monitor his activities closely, analyzing every public appearance and family interaction for signs of changing status or restored favor. This scrutiny reminded all family members of the ongoing challenges associated with his participation in royal events and the need for continued caution in managing his public profile. As spring approached, found himself cautiously optimistic about the possibility of attending more family events, including potential appearances at summer gatherings and private celebrations. The christening had provided a template for successful participation in family life while respecting institutional boundaries, offering hope for a sustainable path forward that honored both family loyalty and public expectations. The transformation in circumstances remained fragile and dependent on continued good judgment and careful management of public perception. Each family gathering represented both an opportunity for further integration and a potential risk that could derail the gradual progress toward acceptance. The balance between family love and institutional protection would continue to define his relationships and opportunities for the foreseeable future. Looking back on the christening several months later, recognized it as a pivotal moment in his journey toward finding a new identity and purpose within the constraints of his changed circumstances. The day had demonstrated that redemption might be possible through consistent demonstration of growth, humility, and respect for the boundaries that his situation required, offering hope for a future that honored both his family relationships and the needs of the monarchy he had served for decades.